Hi everyone, and thanks for watching this last video on theories. We have seen in the first video what a theory is. A theory is a set of interrelated concepts, and graphically it can be represented by boxes with a keyword in it, and with boxes connected with an arrow, right? Here in this video, I want to focus on this arrow. What does this actually mean? Let's take an example. Suppose that I have identified this theoretical relation. Preliminary steps were to conceptualize the case as an instance of influence, then literature or whatever would have delivered the insight that knowledge is related to influence. So we make our theoretical chapter and we put figure 1 theoretical framework, which is a box with keyword knowledge and linked with an arrow to a box with keyword influence. Of course, this is a very simplified theoretical framework. Nota bene, to refer to the previous video on the dichotomies of ABBOTT, you will notice that focusing on knowledge as a kind of cause of influence is a culturalist theory. It does not focus on acts, right? A behaviorist theory would focus more on the money, on the strategies, on the tactics, right? Here it's a cultural theory, it focuses on knowledge. So anyhow, this being said, the question we are busy with here is what does this arrow mean, right? There are actually three main possibilities. The most common way of perceiving this arrow is to say, well, if I have more knowledge, I will have more influence. If I have less knowledge, I will have less influence. Please notice the more here. This implies that influence in knowledge can to some extent be quantified. It's not a qualitative phenomena which is there or not. It's continuous, right, from 0 to 1 with very intermediate positions. So that's quite a common acception of what this arrow means. A second exception, which is also quite common, is that one. There will be no influence if you don't have knowledge. You can have knowledge and have no influence, but you will never have influence without having knowledge. That's a second exception of the signification of this arrow. Not overwhelmingly present, but still frequently there. Last exception is that one. If knowledge, then influence. That is, you could perfectly have influence through other means, through money, influence, tactics, friends, etc. But if you have knowledge, then you will necessarily have influence. I kindly refer to the text of Mahoney for a more detailed explanation about these three kind of conception of causality. Actually, you will see in the article that there are complex variants thereof. I don't want you to study this. Also, it's of course welcome. So the first exception of a cause, you would tend to say knowledge and influence are correlated, right? You would have as x-axis or as cause or independent variable knowledge. You would have as y-axis or dependent variable or effect influence. And these dots represent observation. You have this guy, for instance, has limited knowledge, but an even more limited influence. That guy has quite high influence and medium high knowledge, and so on. And the exercise would consist in quantifying the relation. How much knowledge on average do I need to generate how much influence? So that's a correlation. Yeah, you can also speak of necessary and sufficient causes. At the extreme, both circles only form one, right? That is, knowledge is equal to influence. Correlation means to a certain extent, two circles only constitute one. The correlation coefficient measures the spread between these two circles, but basically saying there is a correlation between two concepts means they are similar to a certain extent. Necessary causes is something else. So that's the argument that that you will never get influence if you don't have knowledge. You see, you should not find observations in this column. You could find cases where there is no knowledge and no influence. You could find cases where there is knowledge and there is no influence. Of course, you will find cases where you have knowledge and influence, but with necessary causes, you are not supposed to find cases in that. The graphical representation by Venn diagrams make this clear. You cannot place this position on the graph, right? You can have points outside here that would correspond to that. These points would be somewhere here in the X circle, but outside the Y circle. This observation would be there inside the Y and inside the X circle, but you cannot place that with necessary cause. This is just impossible. Of course, if this theory is correct. To put it differently, the effect is a subset of a cause, right? So that's necessary cause. That's the exception. No influence without knowledge. The last exception was if knowledge, then influence. The relation is reverted. The X circle is now a subset of the Y circle. The cause is a subset of the effect. With such an argument, you can of course add observations here. Alright. That is cases where you don't have knowledge and where you don't have influence. Such cases are here somewhere, outside both circles. You can have cases like this, without knowledge, but still influence, right, through other means. That would be somewhere in this Y circle. Finally, cases like this are possible as well. That is, cases that are in the X circle and in the Y circle. They would be here somewhere. But this position is impossible. You cannot put such an observation on this graph. Right? So I think it's important for you to understand that there are different types of causal relationships, and that you should specify to some extent what you mean with an arrow. When you say, I relate this to that, what do you mean? Do you mean the more X, the more Y? Do you mean no Y without X? Or do you mean if X, then Y? Last thing, the arrow also implies something, and this is very important as well. What's on the left side of the arrow should come before what's on the right side. Never does a cause occur after its effect. Keep this in mind, please.